"Mom, something's wrong." Those were the first words anyone heard from 10-year-old Lily Whitaker as she stumbled back into her family's farmhouse on the morning of December 24, 1998. Her boots were soaked, her breath came in sharp clouds, and her tiny hands trembled as she pointed back toward the woods behind their property. In that instant, the festive hum of Christmas Eve in the small town of Maple Hollow, Wisconsin, turned to ice. The Whitaker family had lived on the outskirts of Maple Hollow for generations, a place where winters blanketed the pine forests in silence, and the nearest neighbor was half a mile away. The snow that morning was deep and powdery, and the air was so cold it seemed to freeze sound itself. Lily and her older brother, 15-year-old Logan, had planned to go sledding before their grandparents arrived for dinner. But when Lily woke up and Logan's bed was empty, she assumed he'd already gone ahead to their favorite hill. Instead, what she found changed everything. Half a mile into the tree line, past a row of frosted fence posts and a frozen creek, something dark and unnatural bled through the white. At first, she thought it was an old blanket, maybe something Logan had dropped. But as she got closer, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a blanket. It was Logan's winter coat, torn at the sleeve and stiff with blood. Nearby, drag marks crisscrossed the snow, leading deeper into the woods. And then, abruptly, they stopped. Back at the farmhouse, her mother dropped the mixing bowl she was holding. It shattered against the tile, but the sound barely registered. Within minutes, her father was pulling on his boots, dialing 911 with shaking hands. "Please," he said into the phone. "My son's missing. There's blood in the woods. Please hurry." The first deputies arrived just before noon, their cruisers carving tire tracks through the snow-packed road. Sheriff Raymond Holt, a veteran of 30 winters in Maple Hollow, led the initial sweep himself. He'd handled hunting accidents, runaway teens, even a few missing person calls in his time. But as he knelt beside the blood-streaked coat and scanned the woods beyond, his gut told him this was something else. They called in search teams. K-9 units fanned out through the forest. Volunteers from the local church showed up with flashlights and coffee. But hour after hour, the trail led nowhere. The blood stopped. The footprints vanished. It was as if Logan Whitaker had stepped off the face of the earth. The first break came at dusk. A snowmobile crew combing a frozen field 2 miles north of the Whitaker property found something half buried in a drift. A broken watch with Noah's initials scratched into the back. It was still ticking. That discovery ignited a wave of panic across Maple Hollow. People locked their doors. Parents refused to let their children walk to school alone. For the first time in decades, Christmas Eve Mass at St. Agnes Church was half empty. By Christmas morning, the case had already drawn local media attention. News vans lined the icy roads near the Whitakers' home, and headlines screamed, "Maple Hollow teen vanishes, foul play suspected." The sheriff held a press conference in the town square, assuring the community that every available resource was being used. But off-camera, investigators admitted they had almost nothing to go on, no suspects, no eyewitnesses, and no clear motive. Logan Whitaker's disappearance became the talk of every diner booth and gas station counter for weeks. Some whispered about a drifter seen hitchhiking near Route 15. Others pointed to a convicted felon recently released from a nearby prison. A few insisted Noah had run away, though no one could explain the blood. Winter bled into spring, and the snow melted from the forest floor. Still, no sign of Logan. His parents kept his room exactly as he'd left it. The baseball glove on the dresser, the half-finished model airplane on his desk, the Christmas gifts he never opened, still wrapped beneath the tree. And then, on April 14th, a farmer plowing a field 6 miles north made a grim discovery. Half buried beneath the thawing soil was a boot. Inside it, investigators found traces of DNA that matched Logan's. But there was no body, no weapon, and no answers. For the next decade, the mystery haunted Maple Hollow. Cold case detectives would reopen the file twice, in 2005 and again in 2007, each time chasing new leads that led nowhere. Witnesses aged, memories faded, and still, the Cooper family waited. Then, in December 2008, exactly 10 years after that frozen Christmas Eve, a new forensic technique changed everything. DNA extracted from the boot was cross-referenced with a national genealogy database. It produced a hit, a distant relative of a man living less than 30 miles away. That man, police soon learned, had a disturbing history of stalking teenage boys, and he'd once worked as a delivery driver in Maple Hollow. The arrest that followed would shock the entire state. But before we dive deeper into how one tiny breakthrough cracked a case that had gone cold for over a decade, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. 15-year-old Logan Whitaker had always loved winters in Pine Hollow, Wisconsin. Every December, as snow blanketed the tiny town in a hush of white, the Pierce household came alive with traditions that stretched back generations. Garlands on the front porch, candlelit windows, and a towering Douglas fir trimmed with handmade ornaments. To anyone looking in, their life was postcard perfect. 2 parents, 3 kids, and a dog named Scout who always managed to chew through the wrapping paper before Christmas morning. Logan was the middle child, sandwiched between his older sister, Olivia, and his little sister, Lily. Where Olivia was quiet and bookish, Logan was the heartbeat of the family, outgoing, endlessly curious, and fiercely protective of his siblings. He had the kind of energy that filled a room and a smile that seemed too wide for his face. At school, he was known for his relentless optimism and love for science. His teachers often joked he'd end up building rockets for NASA. But at home, in that tight-knit corner of rural Wisconsin, Logan was just a teenager counting down the days to Christmas break. That year, 1998, the season felt even more magical. Pine Hollow was blanketed under the heaviest snowfall the town had seen in nearly a decade, turning streets into silver ribbons and tree branches into frosted sculptures. Families filled the downtown square for caroling and hot cocoa. Kids built snow forts in backyards. And Logan, like always, was right in the middle of it all, planning snowball fights, stringing lights with his dad, and sneaking cookies before dinner. Yet beneath the surface of the holiday cheer, subtle cracks had begun to form, little moments that would only make sense in hindsight. A strange van seen idling near the school. A man in a dark parka who seemed to linger too long outside the local library. Lily remembered her brother mentioning a weird guy once, but no one paid it much attention. After all, Pine Hollow wasn't the kind of place where bad things happened. On the morning of December 21st, Logan woke before sunrise, too excited to sleep. It was the first day of winter break, and he'd promised Lily they'd build the biggest snow fort the neighborhood had ever seen. The two spent the day bundled in layers, their laughter echoing down the quiet street as they piled snow into towering walls. Later, they warmed up with cocoa and watched Christmas movies, the glow of the tree casting soft light across the living room. That evening, Logan mentioned he was going to run a quick errand, a short walk to his friend Evan's house just a few blocks away. It was something he'd done countless times before. His mother reminded him to wear his gloves and be back before dark. He grinned, grabbed his coat, and stepped into the cold. He never came home. The hours that followed would haunt the Pierce family for decades. At first they assumed he'd gotten sidetracked. Maybe he and Evan decided to play video games or help with chores. But by dinner time, worry crept in. By nightfall, panic set in. The streets were silent now, the snow falling harder, erasing footprints and swallowing sound. His father drove in circles through Pine Hollow's narrow roads, headlights cutting through the storm, calling his son's name into the wind. At 11:15 p.m., they called the police. Detectives began their search with a wide radius, scouring every alley, yard, and frozen ditch within a mile of the Pierce home. Neighbors left their holiday parties to join the effort, their flashlights bobbing through the darkness. Search dogs were brought in. Volunteers combed through wooded trails, but the snowfall, beautiful and relentless, had already erased crucial evidence. It was as if the boy had vanished into thin air. In those first 48 hours, hope burned bright. They believed he was nearby, maybe lost, maybe hiding. But days passed without a trace. Christmas came and went, the tree still lit, the presents still wrapped beneath it. The laughter that once filled the Pierce home was replaced by whispered prayers and sleepless nights. Then on December 27th, a heartbreaking discovery shattered any remaining illusions. Lily, trudging through the woods with his father, spotted something half buried beneath the snow. A red wool hat, stiff with ice. It was Logan's, the same hat he'd worn the night he disappeared. The search shifted from rescue to recovery. The discovery of the hat changed everything. Until that moment, hope had been the Whitakers family's last fragile defense against despair, a belief that maybe Logan was still out there, hiding, hurt, or simply lost. But when investigators confirmed the red wool cap, embroidered with the logo of his favorite hockey team, was indeed his, the tone of the search shifted. It was no longer a mission to bring a boy home. It was a race to uncover what had happened to him, and who had taken him. By December 28, 1998, Pine Hollow, a town of barely 5,000, had transformed into a crime scene. Search grids stretched across frozen fields and dense forest. Helicopters thundered overhead, their spotlights cutting through the icy darkness. Neighbors who'd once waved at one another over snow-covered mailboxes now combed the woods shoulder to shoulder, calling Logan's name until their voices cracked. Police dogs traced faint scent trails that vanished at the edge of Pine Hollow Road. And detectives pinned large maps to the Whitaker family's dining room walls, each new discovery marked with colored pins, most of them leading nowhere. The blizzard that had buried the town in holiday charm was now their worst enemy. Every inch of snow erased footprints, covered tire tracks, and washed away critical evidence. Officers found no signs of a struggle, no dropped phone, no broken branches, no blood. It was as if the boy had vanished into the white silence of winter itself. But one thing was clear. Logan had not run away. He'd left home that evening wearing only a thin jacket, expecting a short walk. His wallet, his cash, his favorite baseball cards, all remained in his room. And according to his friend Evan, he'd never arrived at his house that night. Detectives dug deeper, pulling security footage from gas stations and convenience stores within a 10-mile radius. Most cameras showed nothing but blowing snow and empty roads. But one blurry clip, time-stamped at 6:39 p.m., caught something strange. A dark-colored pickup truck slowing near the intersection where Logan would have crossed. Investigators traced dozens of similar vehicles registered in the county. None panned out. Meanwhile, rumors began to ripple through Pine Hollow. One theory claimed a traveling carnival worker had been lurking near the school. Another suggested an online predator. Logan had been known to use early internet chat rooms on the family's shared desktop. And then there was Russell Hayes, a middle-aged recluse who lived in a weather-beaten cabin at the edge of town and was known for wandering the woods at odd hours. Hayes denied any involvement, but suspicion clung to him like frost. The Pierce family refused to let the trail grow cold. They printed thousands of flyers, offered a $25,000 reward, and even appeared on local TV, pleading for their son's return. "Please," his father said, voice trembling, "if someone has him, let him go. We just want him home." But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. By the spring of 1999, the search officially ended. Logan's disappearance became one more name on Wisconsin's growing list of unsolved cases. Life in Pine Hollow never fully returned to normal. Porch lights stayed on all night. Parents stopped letting their children walk alone. Every new face in town was met with suspicion. And every year on December 21st and the day Logan vanished, the community gathered in silence at the town square, candles flickering in the snow. A decade passed. The world moved on. Technology advanced. People graduated, married, left town. But the Pierces remained frozen in that winter of 1998, their home a shrine to the boy they'd lost. His room stayed untouched, hockey posters still on the wall, homework still pinned to a corkboard, as if he might walk back through the door any day. Then, in 2008, the case suddenly roared back to life. Construction workers clearing land for a new subdivision 2 towns over unearthed something strange. A shallow pit covered by weathered boards and decades of leaf litter. Inside were bones. Forensic analysis confirmed what the Pierce family had both feared and prayed for. After 10 long years, Logan Whitaker had been found. The remains were remarkably preserved by the cold Wisconsin soil. Alongside them, detectives found remnants of clothing consistent with what Logan had been wearing, a rusted chain with his name engraved on it, and most chilling of all, a fragment of rope still coiled loosely around one wrist. The location was more than 12 miles from where Logan disappeared, a remote patch of land known mostly to hunters and trappers. Whoever had taken him had gone to great lengths to hide the body. But now, with physical evidence finally in hand, investigators had something they hadn't had in a decade, a chance to solve the case. Fresh leads poured in. Detectives re-interviewed old witnesses, chased new tips, and leveraged forensic technology unavailable in 1998. DNA testing advanced far beyond what had existed when Logan vanished, and it soon produced a breakthrough. Fibers found on the remnants of Logan's jacket matched material recovered from a cabin once owned by none other than Russell Hayes, the reclusive man questioned years earlier. Hayes had vanished shortly after Logan's disappearance, selling his property and disappearing into the Midwest. But now a nationwide manhunt was underway. The question wasn't just who had killed Logan Whitaker, it was why. And the chilling truth, when it finally emerged, would shake Pine Hollow to its core. By the spring of 2006, nearly 8 years after that snow-covered Christmas turned into a nightmare, the case of 14-year-old Logan Whitaker had gone cold. Evidence boxes collected dust in a locked room beneath the Dane County Sheriff's Office. Detectives had rotated, leads had dried up, and the Whitaker family, though still clinging to hope, spoke of Logan less often in the present tense. But then, one mundane afternoon, an unremarkable envelope changed everything. It came from a regional firearms database center in Minneapolis. Inside, a ballistics match. The small, jagged fragment recovered from Logan's jacket, believed to be from a hunting rifle, had been linked to a .30-30 Winchester carbine that surfaced in an unrelated burglary case. The serial number, once thought to have been filed off, had been partially restored by a new forensic technique. And now, that weapon had a name attached to it. The name was Harold Hal Donovan, a retired machinist who had lived less than a mile from the Whitakers back in 1998. It was a quiet moment of revelation, but for investigators it was seismic. Hal's name wasn't new. His was one of dozens scribbled into notebooks during the early days of the investigation. But without hard evidence, he had been dismissed as a dead end. The rifle changed that, and so 8 years later, the cold case task force was reactivated. Detective Rachel Norwood, now leading the investigation, knew the match alone wasn't enough to make an arrest. They needed to build the case from the ground up, carefully and meticulously, without alerting Donovan. The team dug into every detail of his past. What they found was unsettling. Hal Donovan, 62 at the time of the disappearance, had been a known loner, a quiet but deeply private man. Neighbors described him as strange but harmless. He lived alone after a messy divorce, rarely socialized, and spent his weekends tinkering with firearms in a garage workshop. But there was another layer too, a history of trespassing citations, reports of him wandering the woods near local schools, and a disturbing accusation from a decade earlier involving a teenage boy that had been dropped due to insufficient evidence. Still, none of this was proof, and Hal, for all his quirks, had no known connection to Logan or his family. That was until investigators dug into property records and found something chilling. Hal had been part of a small volunteer search party that combed the woods in the days after Logan's disappearance. He had stood just yards away from where Logan's body was eventually found. The breakthrough galvanized the task force. Surveillance began discreetly. They watched Hal's routines, early morning grocery runs, long solitary drives to the edge of town, and hours spent in his garage. He was meticulous, perhaps too meticulous, about cleaning out trash and burning paperwork. It was as if he was hiding something, even after all these years. The slow burn of suspicion grew hotter when detectives interviewed old acquaintances. One former co-worker recalled Hal once boasting about a perfect hunting shot that no one would ever trace. Another mentioned that Hal abruptly sold a truck just weeks after Logan's death, a vehicle that, according to DMV records, was never located again. Piece by piece, a picture emerged, not of an impulsive act, but of a calculated predator who may have been planning something for far longer than anyone realized. In early 2007, a search warrant was granted for Donovan's property. Detectives arrived just after dawn, combing through the dusty farmhouse and detached garage. Hours turned into days and frustration mounted. No blood, no fibers, no trace of Logan. Then, in the rafters above Hal's workbench, a crime lab technician noticed something glinting in the beam of his flashlight. A scrap of fabric barely the size of a matchbook. Tests later confirmed it was part of Logan's jacket, the one he was last seen wearing that night. The discovery reignited public interest in the case. News outlets splashed Donovan's name across headlines. Talk radio hosts speculated wildly about his motives. For the first time, it felt like justice might actually be possible. But the most damning piece of evidence was still to come. In June 2007, an evidence technician cross-referenced the Winchester rifle with a batch of seized ammunition found in Donovan's workshop. A ballistics test confirmed what investigators feared and hoped. The bullet that killed Logan Whitaker came from that weapon. The case, once colder than the Wisconsin winter, was now boiling. Still, Norwood and her team hesitated to move too quickly. They wanted Donovan to make a mistake, to slip, to say something incriminating. They followed him for weeks, but he never did. He was cautious, careful, and maddeningly silent. Then, almost by accident, he gave them the break they needed. In July, during a casual conversation at a hardware store, an undercover officer posing as a fellow gun enthusiast mentioned the 1998 case. Donovan chuckled and muttered, "Kid should have stayed home that night." It was vague, but it was the first time he had ever referenced Logan directly. When confronted days later with the ballistic evidence, he smirked and said, "You can't prove I pulled the trigger." It wasn't a confession, but it was enough. On August 15, 2007, nearly a decade after Logan's body was found in the snow, Harold Donovan was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. The arrest sent shockwaves through the small Wisconsin town. Neighbors who once waved politely now stared in disbelief. Parents who once let their children walk to school alone now clutched their hands a little tighter. The Whitaker family, though relieved, was left grappling with a storm of conflicting emotions. "We spent 10 years wondering who could have done this," Logan's father said. "Now we have an answer, but it doesn't bring him back." As Donovan was led into custody, reporters shouted questions he refused to answer. He remained expressionless, a ghost of the man who had hidden in plain sight for nearly a decade. The case was far from over. A trial loomed, secrets remained, but one thing was certain: the hunt was over. The monster who had haunted a family and a town for 10 long years had finally been unmasked. By the winter of 2008, nearly a decade after Logan Whitaker's lifeless body was pulled from the frozen earth, the quiet town of Maple Hollow found itself at the center of national attention. The murder trial of Harold "Hal" Donovan wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a reckoning. For the Whitakers, it was the moment they had waited 10 long, brutal years for. For the community, it was the final opportunity to make sense of a tragedy that had scarred a generation. Television crews lined the steps of the Dane County Courthouse. Satellite vans crowded the street. Reporters jockeyed for position, each hoping to capture a glimpse of the stooped, gray-haired man as deputies led him through the metal detector and into the courtroom. Donovan, now 72, looked nothing like the specter of fear parents had whispered about in their homes. He wore a pressed plaid shirt and thick glasses, his expression flat and unreadable. But beneath that quiet exterior was a man accused of unthinkable evil. Inside the courtroom, the energy was electric and tense. Rows of townspeople, some who had known Logan, others who had simply followed the case, filled the pews. The Whitaker family sat near the front, clutching each other's hands. Logan's mother, Elaine, wore a silver locket with his school photo inside. His younger brother, now an adult, stared coldly at the defendant. It was the first time the two had been in the same room since that devastating winter morning in 1998. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out their case. Assistant District Attorney Melissa Porter began with a statement that silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a predator hiding in plain sight. It is about a man who watched, who waited, and who took the life of a boy who trusted the safety of his own neighborhood." She walked the jury through the evidence. The ballistics match tying Donovan's rifle to the fatal shot. The scrap of Logan's jacket found hidden in his garage rafters. The suspicious disposal of his truck just weeks after the killing. She recounted witness statements about Donovan's unusual behavior and his chilling comment to an undercover officer. Kid should have stayed home that night. But perhaps the most damning evidence came from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. Forensic scientists explained how microscopic particles of gunshot residue, long thought too degraded to be useful, had been discovered in the fibers of a jacket Donovan wore during the search party. That residue, they testified, was consistent with a .30-30 Winchester carbine discharged at close range. The defense countered with a different narrative. Public defender Craig Willis portrayed Donovan as a lonely, misunderstood man, scapegoated by an overzealous cold case unit, desperate to close a high-profile investigation. He argued that the rifle could have changed hands in the intervening years, and that the scrap of fabric could have been planted. Willis painted the ballistics evidence as circumstantial and suggested that the prosecution had no direct proof that Donovan had ever encountered Logan on the night he died. Then came the most shocking twist of the trial. In a risky move, the defense introduced an alternative suspect, a former drifter who had lived in the area briefly in 1998 and had a history of violent crime. They presented evidence that this man had been arrested in another state for attempted abduction and that he had been in Wisconsin around the time of Logan's disappearance. The theory was speculative, but it was enough to introduce doubt. The jury listened carefully. So did the Whitaker family, their faces stricken. Still, the prosecution had one final card to play: the emotional power of those who had lived the nightmare. Elaine Whitaker took the stand and, through tears, spoke about the moment she learned her son would never come home. She described the sleepless nights, the birthdays spent at a cemetery, and the countless times she had replayed that winter evening in her mind, wondering if she could have done anything differently. The courtroom was silent except for the soft, muffled sobs of jurors and spectators alike. Then came Logan's younger brother, Ethan, whose testimony was perhaps the most devastating of all. He recalled the night he went looking for his brother in the snow, flashlight trembling in his hands, and the unbearable moment when he stumbled upon a piece of Logan's winter coat poking through the frozen ground. "I was 10, he said quietly. "I thought maybe he was hiding. I didn't understand that he was gone." The jury was visibly moved. Even Donovan, who had remained stone-faced for most of the trial, looked down briefly as Ethan spoke. The closing arguments encapsulated everything that made this case so haunting. Porter reminded the jury that justice delayed was not justice denied, that after 10 long years, the truth had finally surfaced. "Do not let this man hide behind time," she urged. "Do not let the cold silence of 1998 remain unbroken." Willis, meanwhile, appealed to reason over emotion. "This is a case built on assumptions and aging evidence," he argued. "You cannot convict a man because it feels like he's guilty." After 4 weeks of testimony and 2 full days of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. The atmosphere was suffocating. Every breath, every heartbeat amplified by the tension. The foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. A wave of gasps and sobs filled the room. Elaine clutched her husband's arm and wept silently. Ethan stared straight ahead, tears sliding down his face. Donovan showed no reaction. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict marked the end of a decade-long quest for justice. It was closure. Imperfect, bittersweet, and irrevocably late. But closure nonetheless. Outside the courthouse, snow began to fall, blanketing the streets in silence once more. For the first time since 1998, Maple Hollow felt a measure of peace. The verdict should have closed the book on the nightmare that began in 1998, but for the people of Maple Hollow, the story of Logan Whitaker didn't end with a gavel strike. If anything, the trial's conclusion marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with grief, reckoning, and uneasy questions that might never be fully answered. The weeks following Harold Donovan's sentencing were a blur of headlines and satellite trucks. National news anchors stood in front of the Dane County Courthouse, summing up the story for audiences across the country. Documentaries were announced. Podcast hosts dissected every moment of the trial. Even Netflix reached out to the Whitaker family with inquiries about a series. But beyond the media frenzy, Maple Hollow was trying to piece itself back together. For many, the arrest had shattered a sense of security they thought they'd regained. Parents who once let their children play freely in the snowy woods now set strict curfews and watched from kitchen windows as they walked to the bus stop. The wooded path where Logan's body was discovered, once a shortcut to the creek, was fenced off and later paved over by the city. No one wanted to walk there anymore. No one even wanted to look at it. But perhaps the biggest change came to the Whitaker family itself. Closure, they learned, was a complicated word. Elaine and Mark Whitaker had waited 10 years for justice. They'd spoken at vigils, testified before legislators about cold case funding, and clung to each new development like it was a lifeline. Yet, as they sat together in a courtroom watching the man who killed their son led away in shackles, they felt a hollow ache rather than triumph. "Justice is supposed to make you feel whole again," Elaine told a local reporter. "But nothing about this makes us whole. It just makes the world feel smaller." Lily Whitaker, now in her early 20s, struggled with a different kind of weight. For years she had been known as the sister, the girl who found the first piece of Logan's jacket, the girl whose childhood ended on a cold winter night. She'd gone on to study criminal justice, hoping to help families like her own, but the case still haunted her. "It's hard to move forward," she admitted during a televised interview. "Because when the case is over, what are you supposed to do next?" The investigation's aftermath also forced the police department to confront its own failures. During the trial, cross-examination revealed early oversights, evidence misplaced, leads ignored, and an initial assumption that Logan was simply a runaway. Those mistakes had cost years and likely allowed Donovan to remain free far longer than he should have. Chief Inspector Dana Ellsworth, who took over the cold case unit in 2003, addressed the issue head-on during a press conference. "We got it wrong in the beginning," she said bluntly, "and that's a reality law enforcement has to face. But this case also proves that persistence matters, that even decades-old evidence can still speak." That message resonated far beyond Wisconsin. The Whitaker case became a rallying cry for renewed cold case efforts nationwide. Several states passed new legislation mandating the preservation of biological evidence for a minimum of 50 years. Funding for cold case units increased, and forensic labs began retroactively testing old samples using updated technology, leading to brie. But amid those victories, the questions persisted. Uncomfortable, unsettling questions that neither the verdict nor the science could fully answer. Why had Donovan chosen Logan? Was it a crime of opportunity? Or had he been watching the boy for longer than anyone realized? Was there a motive beyond the twisted impulse of a predator? And perhaps most chilling of all, was Logan really his only victim? Rumors swirled when, months after the sentencing, investigators announced they were reviewing unsolved disappearances from neighboring counties. A pair of missing teens from the early 1990s. A hitchhiker who vanished in 2001. None were conclusively linked to Donovan, but the possibility lingered, a reminder that the full story might still be buried somewhere in the snow. In the years that followed, the Whitakers dedicated themselves to advocacy. They launched a foundation in Logan's name, funding search and rescue operations and scholarships for aspiring forensic scientists. Every December, they hosted a candlelight vigil on the anniversary of his disappearance, where neighbors and strangers alike gathered to honor a boy whose life had been stolen too soon. "People say time heals," Elaine once said during a memorial speech. "But time doesn't heal. It teaches you how to carry the pain." Even the town's landscape changed as a tribute to Logan's memory. The local park, once known simply as Maple Hollow Recreation Area, was renamed Logan's Grove. A plaque near the entrance reads, "For every child who never came home, may we never stop searching." Still, despite the attempts at healing, Maple Hollow remained marked by the tragedy, a scar that would never fully fade. For some, Harold Donovan's name became a cautionary tale, a whispered warning about the evil that can hide behind a neighbor's friendly smile. For others, the case was a testament to the power of perseverance, proof that even the coldest cases can one day find answers. But perhaps the most haunting truth came from Detective Rachel Norwood, the woman who had reopened the file after almost a decade of silence. In a rare interview, she reflected on the lessons she'd learned, and the ghosts that still followed her. "I've solved homicides before," she said quietly, "but none of them felt like this one. Because when you work a case for 10 years, it becomes a part of you. And when it's over, you realize the ending isn't really an ending. It's just another beginning. For the family, for the town, for all of us." She paused, glancing down at a photo of Logan as she spoke. "I think about him every winter, every time it snows. And I wonder if, somewhere, he knows we never stopped looking." More than a decade after the trial, Logan Whitaker's story still lingers like a chill in the Wisconsin air, a ghost that refuses to fade. It is a reminder that justice, when it finally comes, is rarely neat or complete. But it is also a promise that no matter how much time passes, the search for the truth will never truly end. By the time Harold Donovan was sentenced to life in prison, the story of Logan Whitaker had already transcended Maple Hollow. What had begun as a small-town tragedy in the winter of 1998 had grown into a national obsession, the subject of documentaries, late-night debates, and policy proposals. And while the Whitakers never sought the spotlight, the case had become a cultural touchstone, a cautionary tale about justice delayed, the hidden darkness of everyday life, and the power of persistence. The media storm hit its peak in early 2008, just weeks after the verdict. Every major network ran feature-length segments on the case. Dateline NBC aired a 2-hour special titled "The Boy in the Snow," while 60 Minutes devoted an entire episode to the forensic breakthroughs that brought Donovan to justice. The story dominated front pages and headlines. Decade-old mystery finally solved. Justice for Logan, predator convicted after 10-year hunt. The neighbor no one suspected. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that captivated the nation, it was the timeline. 10 years. A boy who vanished on a December night. A weapon hidden in plain sight. A predator who waved to neighbors while hiding a monstrous secret. The story had all the hallmarks of a modern American true crime saga, and audiences couldn't look away. True crime forums exploded with speculation. Armchair detectives dissected every piece of trial testimony, some arguing that Donovan hadn't acted alone, others suggesting that he might be connected to unsolved cases in neighboring states. Online sleuths pored over old police reports and topographic maps, convinced there were clues investigators had missed. One popular subreddit titled "Justice for Logan" amassed over 500,000 members in its first 6 months. But beyond the sensational headlines and online theories, the case had a far deeper impact, one that reshaped public policy and criminal justice across the United States. The Whitaker case prompted renewed scrutiny of how law enforcement handled missing persons reports, especially when it came to minors. Early in the investigation, police had initially assumed Logan was a runaway, a misstep that wasted crucial days. That error became a rallying point for advocates pushing for reform. In 2009, Wisconsin passed the Logan Act, requiring law enforcement to initiate a full search within 24 hours of a minor's disappearance, regardless of prior behavioral history. Several other states quickly followed suit. National organizations cited the Whitaker case in campaigns for better evidence preservation and expanded cold case funding. The U.S. Department of Justice even launched a new grant program aimed at applying advanced forensic techniques to decades-old cases, a direct response to the breakthroughs that had solved Logan's murder. The ripple effects extended far beyond policy. The case also sparked a cultural reckoning about safety and trust, particularly in small, close-knit communities. In interviews, residents of Maple Hollow confessed to a lingering paranoia. "We used to wave at our neighbors and invite them over for coffee," one woman told a local paper. "Now we double-lock our doors and think twice about who we let near our kids." For the Whitakers, the spotlight was a double-edged sword. On one hand, they were grateful that Logan's story had inspired change. On the other, the constant attention was exhausting. "We didn't want to be a headline," Elaine said during a CNN interview. "We just wanted our son back. And since that's not possible, we want to make sure this never happens to another family." The media attention also brought unexpected scrutiny to the investigators themselves. Detective Rachel Norwood, who had spearheaded the cold case unit, became something of a public figure, invited to speak at law enforcement conferences and featured on panels about forensic innovation. But she was also candid about the pressure that came with solving a case in the public eye. "People think these stories always have neat endings," she said, "but real investigations are messy, exhausting, and often incomplete. Even when you solve the case, you're left with 1,000 questions you'll never get answers to." One of those unanswered questions lingered in the public consciousness. Why Logan? Prosecutors believed it was opportunistic, that Donovan, isolated and angry, saw a chance to exert power and took it. But others weren't convinced. Journalists uncovered reports that Donovan had been spotted watching local children at a sledding hill weeks before the murder. Another report suggested he may have followed Logan home from a nearby gas station days before the disappearance. Theories proliferated, but Donovan never provided clarity. In the few interviews he granted from prison, he remained cold and detached. "It's over," he told a reporter flatly. "I don't have anything else to say." That silence only fueled the public's fascination. Documentaries about the case consistently ranked among Netflix's most watched. Podcast series on the crime reached millions of downloads. College courses on forensic science used the case as a teaching example. Logan's story had become a part of America's true crime mythology, one that was dissected, debated, and retold endlessly. But amid all the noise, one thing remained constant: the haunting image of a boy who vanished on a snowy December night, and the town that never stopped searching for him. In Maple Hollow, the effects of the case were visible everywhere. A memorial bench bearing Logan's name was installed outside the public library. The high school gymnasium was renamed in his honor, and every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, the community gathered in the town square to light candles and read the names of other missing children from across the state. It was a ritual of remembrance and a vow. "We do this because we promised Logan we wouldn't forget," said Pastor David Lennox, who presided over the vigils. "We do this because somewhere out there, another family is still waiting for answers. And if his story teaches us anything, it's that answers can come, even when the trail has gone cold." And by the end of 2009, the Whitaker case had become more than a local tragedy. It was a blueprint for hope, a cautionary tale, and a symbol of resilience. And while Maple Hollow had changed forever, the legacy of one boy and the decade-long search for his killer continued to shape the future of justice across America. As Elaine Whitaker said at the final vigil before moving out of town, "This isn't just Logan's story anymore. It belongs to every parent who has ever feared the dark, every detective who has ever refused to give up, and every child who deserves to come home." The snow returns every December in Maple Hollow. It drifts quietly over the pine-lined roads and blankets the frozen fields in the same unbroken white that once hid the darkest secret this town had ever known. To outsiders, it looks peaceful, almost idyllic. But for those who lived through it, every flake carries a memory. A boy's laughter echoing down the street, a family's desperate search, and a decade-long silence finally broken. More than 20 years have passed since that night in 1998, when 14-year-old Logan Whitaker never made it home. The case that began with heartbreak and confusion has become part of Maple Hollow's very identity. It is a story told in classrooms and courtrooms, whispered over coffee in the diner, and immortalized in documentaries and podcasts. The name Logan Whitaker no longer belongs to just one family. It belongs to an entire community. And yet, for those who knew him, the story is not about courtrooms or headlines. It's about the empty chair at Christmas dinner, the birthday candles that were never blown out, the milestones he never reached. High school graduation, first job, college acceptance, all frozen in time like the winter he vanished. Elaine Whitaker still visits Logan's grave every Sunday. She brings fresh flowers in the summer and evergreen sprigs in the winter. Sometimes she talks to him, tells him about the weather, about Ethan's new job, about the town changing around them. Other times, she just sits in silence, letting the cold wind carry her unspoken words into the trees. People ask if it gets easier, she told a journalist last year. It doesn't. But I've learned to live alongside the pain. It's part of who I am now. The case has left scars on Maple Hollow too. It changed how people think about safety, how they trust their neighbors, and how they talk to their children. Before Logan, the town was the kind of place where kids roamed freely until the streetlights came on. After Logan, that innocence was gone. Parents walked their kids to school, teenagers carried cell phones, community watch groups formed, and every unfamiliar car parked on a quiet street drew suspicious eyes. But the case did more than just heighten fear. It sparked action. Because of Logan, Wisconsin changed how it investigates missing child reports. Across the country, cold case units gained funding and tools they had never had before. Forensic technology leapt forward, and countless other families, who once believed their loved ones' stories would never be solved, finally got answers. Logan's tragedy became a catalyst for change that saved lives far beyond Maple Hollow's borders. Still, even with justice served and the killer behind bars, a lingering question remains. What if the police had found him sooner? It is a question that haunts Detective Rachel Norwood. She's retired now, but she still keeps a faded case photo of Logan on her desk. I replay those first 48 hours in my head more than I'd like to admit, she says. We made mistakes. We assumed things we shouldn't have. If we'd known then what we know now, maybe he'd be alive. That sentiment, the weight of maybe, is something that no amount of justice can erase. In the years since the trial, Logan's story has taken on a life of its own. His case is studied in criminology classes. His name is invoked in legislative hearings. Journalists revisit the details every anniversary, searching for new angles in a story that feels both complete and unfinished. And every December, when the first snow falls, strangers still leave flowers and small toys by the plaque in Logan's Grove, the park that bears his name. Some leave notes. We never forgot. For every child still missing. Thank you for helping us believe that justice is possible. Those tributes are proof that Logan's legacy extends far beyond the circumstances of his death. It's a legacy of resilience, of a family who refused to stop searching, of detectives who refused to give up, and of a community that learned even the coldest trails can still lead to truth. But it is also a warning, a reminder that evil rarely announces itself. It lives next door. It waves hello. It mows its lawn and attends the neighborhood barbecue. And sometimes it watches and waits, hiding in plain sight until the moment it decides to strike. Today, Harold Donovan will likely die in prison. He speaks to no one and writes to no one. When asked by reporters if he feels remorse, he offers only silence. For him, the story is over. For everyone else, it never will be. Logan's story, like so many others, remains a scar on the American landscape, A chilling reminder of how fragile life can be and how darkness can lurk beneath the most ordinary surface. But it is also proof that persistence matters, that evidence endures, and that even when the trail runs cold, the truth still has a way of rising to the surface. And so, every winter when the snow falls softly over Maple Hollow and the world seems peaceful once again, the town remembers. They remember the boy with the bright blue parka and the crooked smile. They remember the decade of searching, the sleepless nights, and the day justice finally arrived. And they remember the lesson that came with it, that time may bury the truth, but it can never erase it. Now that you know the haunting story of Logan Whitaker, we want to hear from you. Do you believe justice was truly served, or are there questions that will never be answered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And before you go, let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story.